I saved 2 giant Apache sisters. Now they refuse to leave his ranch. Silas Ward had saved people before. A drowning child. A man trapped under his horse. A woman lost in a storm. They thanked him, went home, and life continued as usual. That was how saving someone was supposed to work. But these 2 weren't following the rules. Ayanna and Kachina stood nearly 7 feet tall, their shadows stretching across his front porch like dark promises. When he'd found them 3 days ago, surrounded by traitors with blood on their knuckles, he'd done what any decent man would do. He'd stepped in, stopped the violence, brought them to his ranch to recover. Now they sat on his steps as if they owned the place, speaking in their native tongue, pointing at his cattle, his land, his home, when he gently suggested they might want to return to their people. Ayanna had looked at him with eyes like black steel and said something that chilled him to the bone. "We stay. You saved us. Now we protect you." The strange part wasn't that 2 Apache women had claimed his ranch as their territory. The strange part was how they'd known exactly where to find the hidden rifle he kept behind the water trough. How they'd identified which of his horses had gone lame before he'd even noticed. How they'd started preparing meals from plants on his property that he'd never seen them gather. But the strangest part of all was what Kachina had whispered to her sister when they thought he couldn't hear. 3 words in English, clear as morning frost. They found us. Who had found them? And why did 2 women who'd been rescued act like they were the ones doing the protecting? The first sign of trouble came with the dust cloud on the horizon. Silas squinted against the afternoon sun, watching 3 riders approach his property at a pace that suggested urgency rather than social calling. He recognized Rufus Garrett's stocky frame leading the group, his face already set in the hard expression Silas had learned to dread. Behind him rode 2 men Silas didn't recognize, their hands resting too casually on their weapons. "Ward," Rufus called out before his horse had even stopped. "We need to talk." Ayanna and Kachina emerged from the shadow of the porch without a sound, their impressive height making the mounted men shift uncomfortably in their saddles. Kachina's dark eyes swept over the strangers with calculating precision, while Ayanna stepped closer to Silas with fluid grace that seemed more like a warrior taking position than casual movement. "About what?" Silas asked, though his gut already knew the answer. Rufus gestured toward the sisters with obvious distaste. "About them. Mrs. Henderson saw them in town yesterday when you bought supplies." "Word's spreading fast, Ward. People are asking questions." "What kind of questions?" "The kind that end badly for everyone involved." One of the strangers leaned forward in his saddle. "Name's Curtis Vale. I speak for several concerned families in the area. These Apache women need to move along." Silas felt heat rise in his chest. "They're recovering from injuries. They'll leave when they're ready." "That's not how this works," Rufus said, his voice dropping low. "You know what happened to the Morrison place last year when they sheltered that Comanche boy. Community burned them out. Family had to relocate to Kansas. The threat hung in the air like smoke from a dying fire." Silas had heard the stories about the Morrison ranch, though no one ever spoke of it directly. One day they were neighbors. The next their house stood empty with scorch marks on the walls. Kachina spoke quietly to her sister in Apache, never taking her eyes off Vale. Ayanna nodded almost imperceptibly, then addressed Silas in English, thick with accent, but clear in meaning. "These men bring bad spirit. They fear what they cannot control." Vale's hand moved toward his gun. "I don't like being discussed in some heathen tongue." The movement was slight, almost casual, but Ayanna noticed. In one smooth motion, she stepped directly between Vale and Silas, her 7-foot frame casting both men in shadow. Her sister mirrored the action, flanking the other side. "Easy now," Silas said, raising his hands. "No one's looking for trouble here." But Vale was studying the sisters with new intensity, his eyes narrowing as if he'd recognized something troubling. When he spoke again, his voice carried a different kind of threat. "Those aren't just any Apache women, Ward. I'd bet my ranch on it." Silas felt the atmosphere shift like air before a thunderstorm. "What do you mean by that?" he asked, though part of him didn't want to know the answer. Vale's weathered face showed the kind of recognition that comes from wanted posters and campfire warnings. Big Apache women, traveling in pairs, one with a scar across her left palm. His eyes fixed on Kachina's hand, where a pale line bisected her dark skin. "You're harboring the Crow Feather Sisters." The name hit Silas like cold water. He'd heard whispers of Crow Feather Apache who'd been causing trouble for traders and settlers across 3 territories. Women who could track a man for days, who knew the land better than those born to it, who'd supposedly killed 2 cavalry scouts in hand-to-hand combat. Ayana's jaw tightened, but she didn't deny the accusation. "Is that true?" Silas asked her directly. "Names are wind," Ayana replied, her English careful and deliberate. "Actions are stone. We have done nothing to you but accept shelter." Rufus laughed harshly. "Accept shelter? Ward, they're using you. These 2 have been terrorizing trade routes for months. That's why those traders were after them when you found them." A memory surfaced unbidden, the way Ayana had positioned herself during the fight 3 days ago. Not like a victim, but like someone who'd been cornered. The efficiency with which Kachina had tended to their wounds using plants she'd somehow known to find on his property. The complete lack of fear in their eyes when facing armed men. "The traitors," Silas said slowly. "What were they carrying?" Vale's expression grew uglier. "Supplies for Apache families up north. Food, medicine, blankets. These 2 attacked their wagon train, stole what they could carry, scattered the rest, left good men beaten and robbed. We took only what was stolen first." Kachina spoke for the first time, her voice like gravel. "White traders sell spoiled food to our people, take silver, let children starve. We return what belongs to our families." "That's their story," Rufus spat. "But the territorial marshals got warrants for both of them. $500 each, dead or alive." The number hung in the air between them. $500 was more money than most men saw in 2 years of honest work. Silas could feed his cattle through the winter, repair his barn, maybe even buy that breeding bull he'd been considering. All he had to do was turn in 2 women who'd trusted him with their lives. Ayana watched his face with the patience of someone who'd learned to read men's souls through their eyes. When she spoke, her words carried the weight of absolute certainty. "You will not hand us over. Not because you are a good man, though you are. You will not do it because you know what we know." What's that supposed to mean? But before she could answer, the sound of approaching horses echoed across the valley. More riders were coming, and from the dust they kicked up, there were at least 6 of them. The approaching riders weren't neighbors. Silas counted 6 men in military-style formation, their horses maintaining perfect spacing despite the rough terrain. At their head rode a man with silver hair and cold blue eyes, a badge glinting on his vest like a distant star. Behind him, 5 deputies spread out in a practiced pattern that suggested they'd done this many times before. "Marshal Dalton," Vale called out with obvious relief. Good timing. The marshal's gaze swept over the scene with professional efficiency. 3 local men on horseback, 1 rancher, and 2 towering Apache women who stood with the stillness of predators assessing their options. His weathered face showed no surprise, only the grim satisfaction of a man who'd found what he'd been looking for. Mr. Ward, I presume, Dalton said, dismounting with deliberate slowness. I'm Marshal Ben Dalton. I believe you have something that belongs to the territorial court. Ayanna and Kachina exchanged a look that spoke volumes. Without a word, both sisters moved to flank Silas more closely, their positioning strategic rather than protective. Silas found himself studying their faces and seeing something he'd missed before. These weren't women running from justice. They were women who'd been cornered by it. If you're here for them, Silas said carefully, you'll need to explain the charges first. Dalton reached into his coat and withdrew 2 folded papers. Ayanna Crowfeather and Kachina Crowfeather. Wanted for theft of federal supplies, assault on territorial traders, and conspiracy to incite Apache uprising. Combined bounty of $1,000. The amount made Rufus whistle low. Even Vale's eyes widened at the sum. Those are serious accusations, Silas said. They are indeed. Dalton's voice carried the authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed. The territorial government takes a dim view of anyone who interferes with lawful commerce, especially when that interference threatens to restart hostilities with Apache tribes. Kachina spoke quietly to her sister in Apache, her tone urgent but controlled. Ayanna nodded once, then addressed Dalton directly in English that carried no trace of submission. Your lawful commerce sells poisoned grain to children. Your traders water down medicine until it becomes useless. Your government promises food that never comes. That's not for you to judge, Dalton replied. You took justice into your own hands, and now you'll answer for it. We answered already, Ayanna said. To our chief, to our people, to our ancestors. Your law means nothing on Apache land. You're not on Apache land now. The statement hung between them like a blade. Silas realized with growing unease that everyone was looking at him, waiting for his decision. The marshal expected cooperation. The bounty hunters wanted their reward. The neighbors wanted the problem removed. But as he watched Ayanna's face, Silas saw something that chilled him more than any threat. She wasn't afraid of being captured. She was afraid of something else entirely. Marshal, Silas said slowly, before we discuss turning anyone over, I'd like to hear their side of the story. Dalton's expression hardened. This isn't a negotiation, Ward. Harbor fugitives and you become one yourself. Silas felt the weight of every eye upon him, but it was Kachina's whispered words that made his blood run cold. If they take us back, we die. Not from white man's justice. From our own people. The admission came so quietly that only Silas heard it, but it changed everything. These women weren't just running from territorial law. They were fleeing something within their own tribe. What do you mean? He asked under his breath. But Marshal Dalton had grown impatient with their conversation. I'm giving you one chance, Ward. Step aside, and this ends peacefully. Interfere, and I'll arrest you as an accomplice. On what grounds? Aiding and abetting known fugitives. Obstruction of justice. I can think of 6 charges that'll stick. Dalton's hand rested casually on his gun butt. Your choice. Rufus leaned forward in his saddle, his voice taking on a reasonable tone that fooled no one. Silas, be smart about this. These women have brought nothing but trouble. Send them on their way, collect the reward, and life goes back to normal. But Ayanna stepped closer to Silas, her massive frame blocking his view of the marshal. When she spoke, her words carried desperate urgency disguised as calm statement. Our chief made arrangement with white traders, promised our young women as wives to secure better prices for goods. Kachina and I were chosen first because of our size. White men pay more for strong Apache women to work their mines. The revelation hit Silas like a physical blow. These weren't warriors stealing supplies. They were women fleeing forced marriages to brutal mine owners. My sister speaks truth, Kachina added, her English halting but clear. Chief Yellowbear sells his own people. We refuse, so he brands us thieves, tells white law we are criminals. Easier than admitting he trades daughters for gold. Dalton's expression remained unchanged, but several of his deputies shifted uncomfortably. Even Vale looked troubled by the implications. Convenient story, the marshal said, but the evidence says otherwise. You attacked legitimate traders, stole federal supplies and left 3 men requiring medical attention. We took only what was meant for children, Ayana replied. Food that would have rotted in wagon while babies starved. Medicine that was already spoiled when it arrived. We harm no one who did not try to harm us first. That's not how the law works. Silas found himself studying the faces around him. Marshal Dalton showed no emotion, but his deputies were exchanging glances. Rufus looked increasingly uncomfortable. Even Vale seemed less certain than before. The truth was, everyone in the territory knew the stories about crooked Indian agents and corrupt traders. Government supplies that never reached their intended recipients. Medicine watered down until it was useless. Food that arrived months late and spoiled beyond consumption. Marshal, Silas said carefully, if these women are telling the truth about their chief selling them into forced marriages, wouldn't returning them be sentencing them to a fate worse than prison? Dalton's jaw tightened. That's not my concern. My job is to enforce territorial law, not judge tribal politics. But as he spoke, one of his deputies rode forward, his young face troubled. Sir, if I may, the Martinez mining operation has been advertising for strong Indian wives in the territorial papers, offering significant payments to chiefs who can provide them. The deputy's words hung in the air like gunpowder smoke. Marshal Dalton's face darkened as he turned to face the young man who'd spoken. Deputy Collins, you're out of line. But sir, if the Martinez outfit is buying Apache women for mining work, and these women were fleeing forced marriages, Collins's voice trailed off under his superior's withering glare. But the damage was done. Silas saw the shift in the gathered men's expressions. Rufus was studying his boots with sudden intensity. Vale looked like he'd swallowed something bitter. Even Dalton's other deputies were exchanging uncertain glances. The Martinez mining concern operates under territorial license, Dalton said firmly. Their labor practices are none of our concern. Labor practices? Ayana's voice carried a contempt that could have frozen fire. You call slavery by pretty name, but chains still cut wrists. Kachina stepped forward, rolling up her sleeve to reveal faded scars around her wrist. Yellowbear let Martinez men see us before. Test our strength. Check our teeth like horses. When we refuse to go, chiefs say we steal to make us criminals. The scars were old but unmistakable, rope burns from restraints. Silas felt something cold settle in his stomach as he realized what the sisters had endured. This doesn't change anything, Dalton insisted, but his voice lacked its earlier authority. Warrants are warrants. The law is the law. Whose law? Silas asked quietly. The question seemed to surprise everyone, including himself. But once spoken, he couldn't take it back. The law that says a man can buy women like cattle. The law that lets government agents sell spoiled food to starving children. Or the law that says a man has the right to protect innocent people on his own property. Dalton's hand moved closer to his weapon. Careful, Ward. You're walking a dangerous line. Maybe I am. Silas looked around at the assembled men, then back at the marshal. But I've made my decision. These women stay on my ranch until they choose to leave. You're making a mistake that'll cost you everything. Maybe. But it's my mistake to make. Rufus urged his horse forward, his face flushed with anger. Silas, think about what you're doing. The territorial government won't stand for this. Neither will your neighbors. Then my neighbors will have to live with their consciences. Same as me. Vale spat into the dust. This isn't over, Ward. Marshal, what are you going to do about this? Dalton studied Silas with cold calculation, then glanced at his deputies. Several of them were avoiding his gaze entirely, while Collins looked openly sympathetic to the Apache women. I'll be back, Dalton said finally, with federal marshals and a federal warrant. When I return, anyone harboring these fugitives will be arrested on sight. He remounted his horse with sharp, angry movements, but before wheeling around to leave, he fixed Silas with a stare that promised retribution. You've got 48 hours to reconsider, Ward. After that, this becomes a federal matter. As the marshal and his men rode away, Ayanna placed a massive hand on Silas's shoulder. You have chosen path that leads to fire, she said quietly. We cannot let you burn for us. That evening, Silas found the sisters preparing to leave. They'd packed what little they had into bundles that could be carried easily, their movements efficient and silent. Ayanna was checking the loads on their makeshift packs, while Kachina studied the horizon, with the intensity of someone planning an escape route. Running away in the dark won't solve anything, Silas said from the porch. Ayanna straightened slowly, her expression unreadable in the lamplight spilling from his windows. We bring death to your door. Better we face our fate than let you face yours. My fate is my own choice. Choice? Kachina's laugh held no humor. You think white law gives choices? Federal marshals come with guns, not questions. They shoot first, count bodies later. Silas stepped down from the porch, moving closer to the women who'd become an unexpected responsibility. Maybe. But I've seen what happens to people who get handed over to the Martinez mines. I've heard the stories. Stories, Ayanna repeated. What stories? Apache women who go into those mines and never come out. Work crews that get smaller every month. Graves that don't have names on them. He met her eyes directly. Your chief isn't just selling you into marriage. He's selling you into death. The sisters exchanged a long look, communicating in the wordless way that only family could manage. When Ayanna spoke again, her voice carried a weariness that seemed to age her before his eyes. Yellow Bear lost 3 sons to white soldiers 5 winters ago. His heart turned to stone, his mind to gold. He says Apache must adapt or die, but he chooses who adapts and who dies. That's why you took the supplies. Children were starving while traders sold good food to white settlements for higher prices. Babies died of fever while medicine sat in warehouses waiting for better offers. Kachina's hands clenched into fists. We could not watch our people suffer for one man's greed. Silas found himself thinking of his own choices over the years, the times he'd looked away from injustice because it was easier than getting involved. The Morrison family, burned out for helping one Comanche boy. Other neighbors who disappeared after crossing the wrong people. How many others has Yellow Bear sold? 6 women this season. All young. All strong. Martinez pays $50 in silver for each one, plus promises of better trade agreements. Ayanna's voice grew hard. 3 are already dead. Mines are dangerous for men. Worse for women who resist. The mathematics of it hit Silas like a blow to the stomach. If the territorial government was willing to pay $1,000 for these 2 women, they represented a significant threat to a profitable arrangement. No wonder Marshal Dalton had seemed more interested in capturing than listening. A sound from the distance made all 3 of them freeze. Horses moving at night across rough ground. Too many horses for a casual visit. They come early, Kachina whispered. Silas counted the sound of hoofbeats. At least 10 riders, possibly more. Federal marshals didn't usually travel in such large groups unless they expected serious resistance. Get to the barn, he told the sisters. There's a root cellar behind the feed bins. It's hidden, but you can get to it through the back wall. We do not hide while you face danger for us, Ayana said firmly. You'll hide if I tell you to hide. This is still my ranch. But even as he spoke, Silas realized the approaching riders weren't coming from the direction of town. They were coming from the east, from Apache territory. And the sound they made wasn't the disciplined rhythm of federal marshals. It was the scattered pattern of war party. The riders emerged from the darkness like ghosts materializing from smoke. 12 Apache warriors on painted horses, their faces marked with war paint that gleamed in the moonlight. At their head rode a man whose bearing spoke of absolute authority, Chief Yellow Bear, his gray hair braided with silver ornaments that caught the light like trapped stars. Ayana and Kachina stepped forward without hesitation, placing themselves between Silas and the approaching war party. Their massive frames created a wall of defiance that even mounted warriors would have to respect. "My daughters," Yellow Bear called out in English, his voice carrying across the yard with ceremonial formality. "You have brought shame to our people. Come home and face judgment." "We are not your daughters anymore," Ayana replied, her words cutting through the night air like a blade. "You sold that bond for Martinez silver." Yellow Bear's face darkened with anger. "I arranged marriages that would benefit our tribe. You chose to spit on Apache tradition. Tradition does not sell women like horses," Kachina shot back. "Tradition does not let children starve while chiefs grow fat on white man's gold." The chief's hand moved to his tomahawk, and several of his warriors shifted restlessly on their mounts. Silas realized with growing alarm that this confrontation could turn deadly in seconds. "Chief Yellow Bear," he said, stepping forward despite Ayana's attempt to block him. "These women are under my protection. They've committed no crime on my land. White man has no authority over Apache justice," Yellow Bear replied coldly. "My daughters broke tribal law. They will return to face consequences. And those consequences? Marriage to Martinez men, as arranged. If they refuse again, they will be cast out from the tribe forever. With no family, no clan, no identity. They will become nothing." Silas saw Ayana's shoulders stiffen at the threat. For Apache, banishment from the tribe was a fate worse than death. It meant becoming invisible, without purpose or belonging in a world that recognized only tribal identity. "There's another option," Silas said quietly. Yellow Bear's eyes narrowed. "Speak." "They stay here, on my ranch, under my protection. I'll pay whatever bride price Martinez offered, plus compensation for any troubles they've caused." The offer hung in the air like smoke from a campfire. Several warriors muttered among themselves, while Yellow Bear studied Silas with calculating eyes. "You would claim them as your wives? I would claim them as members of my household, free to choose their own paths. And if they choose to leave, then they leave. But the choice is theirs, not yours or mine." Yellow Bear's expression grew thoughtful, but before he could respond, the sound of approaching horses came from the opposite direction. Federal marshals, arriving exactly as promised, with torches blazing and guns drawn. Marshal Dalton's voice cut through the darkness like a whip crack. "Nobody move! This is federal business." Silas found himself caught between two forces, Apache warriors on one side, federal marshals on the other, with two giant women who refused to back down from either threat. The standoff that followed would determine not just the fate of Ayana and Kachina, but the future of everyone involved. The silence stretched like a taut rope ready to snap. 12 Apache warriors faced 8 federal marshals across Silas's yard, with him and the sisters caught in the crossfire. Torches flickered against painted faces and badge metal, creating shadows that danced like harbingers of violence. Marshal Dalton broke the silence first. "Chief Yellow Bear, these women are federal fugitives. Stand aside. These women are Apache. They answer to Apache law," Yellow Bear replied, his voice steady as granite. "Not anymore they don't," Ayana said, her words carrying across the yard with absolute finality. "We choose new law. We choose to stay with Silas Ward." The declaration sent ripples through both groups. Warriors muttered among themselves while marshals shifted nervously in their saddles. "You cannot simply choose," Yellow Bear said, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. "We can," Kachina added, stepping closer to her sister. "Apache law says woman can claim protection of man who saves her life. Silas Ward saved us. We claim his protection." Silas stared at them in amazement. "Is that true?" "Very old law," Ayana confirmed. "Older than Yellow Bear's arrangements with white traders. If Chief forces us to leave protection of our savior, he breaks sacred tradition." Yellow Bear's face darkened with frustrated rage, but several of his warriors were nodding in recognition of the ancient custom. Even he couldn't openly violate tribal law that predated his authority. Marshal Dalton urged his horse forward. "This doesn't change the federal warrants." "Actually, it does," Deputy Collins said quietly, earning sharp looks from his superior. "If they're claiming traditional Apache protection rights, and they're on private property with the owner's consent, federal jurisdiction becomes complicated." "Complicated how?" "Territorial law recognizes tribal customs in civil matters. If this is a civil protection claim rather than a criminal harboring." Collins trailed off under Dalton's withering stare, but the damage was done. Silas seized the opening. "Marshal, these women haven't committed any crimes on my property. They've helped with ranch work, caused no trouble, threatened no one. If they want to stay here as hired hands, that's between them and me. The federal warrants were issued based on complaints from traders who may have been operating illegally themselves," Silas continued. "If those traders were selling spoiled goods to Apache families, then recovering stolen property becomes a civil matter, not criminal." Dalton's jaw worked silently as he realized the legal trap closing around him. Prosecuting the sisters would require investigating the traders' practices, which could expose the Martinez mining arrangement and embarrass territorial officials. Yellow Bear watched this exchange with growing understanding. "You would keep them as workers?" "I would keep them as whatever they choose to be. Workers, family, partners in the ranch." Silas looked directly at both sisters. "As long as they want to stay." Ayana and Kachina exchanged one of their wordless conversations, then both nodded. "We stay," Ayana said simply. "This is home now." Yellow Bear stared at them for a long moment, then slowly nodded. "Apache law is satisfied. You have chosen your path." Marshal Dalton looked around at the assembled faces. Apache warriors who'd accepted their chief's decision, deputies who clearly sympathized with the sisters, and a rancher who'd outmaneuvered federal authority through sheer determination. "This isn't over," he said finally, but the words lacked conviction. "Yes, it is," Silas replied. 3 months later, Silas watched Ayana and Kachina working in the garden they'd planted behind his house, their laughter carrying on the morning breeze. They'd never spoken of leaving again. His ranch had become their fortress, and they'd become his most devoted protectors. Neighbors still whispered, but none dared challenge the arrangement. The giant Apache sisters who refused to leave had found their home, and Silas Ward had found his family. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable Western tale where courage and destiny collide in unexpected ways. Don't forget to subscribe and consider a super chat to help us keep bringing you more stories like these. Your support means everything to us.